And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chris.
And I'm Danielle, and this is the State of Freedom. Good afternoon, everybody. Today, we wanted to have a little bit of a different kind of episode than you're used to. We are leaving an intense war season at the legislature, and we are already shifting into a different war season on the campaign trail. We want to use today's episode to do a couple things. One is to recount the victories that the Lord gave us this session, because we absolutely have to celebrate the victories. We're going to give you an update about what we're up to behind the scenes. And finally, we'll lay a little groundwork on what you can expect now that we're full steam ahead into campaign mode. So with that, let me give us the scripture for today. I'll start out with that. Proverbs 24, verses 1 through 6. And it says, "Don't envy the wealth of the wicked or crave their company, for they're obsessed with causing trouble, and their conversations are corrupt. Wise people are builders. They build families, businesses, communities, and through intelligence and insight, their enterprises are established and endure. Because of their skilled leadership, the hearts of people are filled with the treasures of wisdom and the pleasures of spiritual wealth. Wisdom can make anyone into a mighty warrior, and revelation knowledge increases strength. Wise strategy is necessary to wage war, and with many astute advisors, you'll see the path to victory more clearly." I was reading that this morning. It's in my proverb for the day, and I was reflecting on the fact that it's so important for us to keep our eyes on the work that the Lord has given us. Why should we envy anything about the lives of the wicked? I find myself sometimes in conversations where it's almost envy. It's not real envy, but you just are like, these people never get shadow banned off of Facebook, and they get promotions and they get business deals wherever they go. But the truth is, we don't envy their lives or the state of their heart and conscience. I mean, how stressed out do you have to be to live a life of lies? We're so much better off to focus on what the Lord has called us to build. He's called us to be leaders, builders, wise strategists, and warriors. And Chris, as I was thinking about this, I really thought this community, the State of Freedom listeners and LACAG supporters and partners, are all of those things. They're builders and leaders, wise strategists and warriors. And it's my prayer that this is a little place people come to get refueled with the word of the Lord, to be strengthened, and to get strategy for how to make a difference in our state.
I love that. I love the proverbs for today, and what will stick with me is just the little phrase in there: "Wise people are builders." One thing that I've noticed, it's so fabulous. One thing that I've noticed about our group, about LaCag, about our friends on the State of Freedom, they're all builders. They want to build something. I love the fact that no one in our organization or in our group is trying to undermine anyone else, undermine any other group that is also trying to accomplish great things. We all want to build. We don't want to undermine. We want to support one another. And I love that. And I think that our group really reflects that. Also, what you said about having our platform and our organization as a place where we love one another, support one another, heal one another, and enrich one another. That's what we're all about. We should be a source of mutual support and love and enrichment for one another, because you know what? When you do that for each other within this family, not only are we honoring the heart of God, but we are strengthening one another for the battle ahead. It's almost like LaCag and the State of Freedom is a safe harbor and a refuge for healing. And so we come, we get replenished, and then we go out and battle again. I love that. I love that prayer today.
Yeah, and we do have some battles ahead of us, and we have some battles already in our midst. A couple of news items we wanted to touch on today. The first is the story with Marcus Venable, the LSU graduate student who's teaching, right?
He's also teaching there, yes. And even though the left has now disputed whether or not he was a professor, clearly he was it was stated on the website that he was a professor, where your students go to a site called Rate Your Professor, so they could rate Marcus Venable. But the latest on that, Danielle, is that he has been, in fact, terminated from his teaching position, will not be allowed to teach at LSU, but he hasn't been removed from the campus altogether. So at this point, Professor Venable will be allowed to continue his education. Presumably, when that is complete, will no longer be a part of the LSU family because he will not be allowed to teach. Now, there are a number of people, Danielle, who say that, in light of what he has done, in light of the traditional double standard that exists in cases like this, when it's a conservative versus when it's a leftist, that does not go nearly far enough. And there are many people who are demanding,
Including us.
including us, that he be removed and expelled from the LSU campus.
Yeah, and I would just encourage our listeners to, if you haven't yet, or even if you have already, just call LSU and let them know that this flies in the face of the student code of conduct, and they have every grounds to expel this guy for behaving so dishonorably. The other thing I kind of wanted to raise on this, Chris, you mentioned before the show that there's a quote unquote free speech group who's backing this guy's right to say what he said. And I just think that the left really loves free speech when it's convenient for them.
It seems to. It is extraordinary to me. This Louisiana Illuminator, I believe, maybe there's a group that published the article on this recently, suggesting that his that Professor Venable's termination from his teaching position for what he said to Senator Mike Facey in a voicemail is improper because it violates his First Amendment free speech rights. First, that's very interesting.
Where were they when we wanted to talk about ivermectin? I don't remember them popping their heads up.
It's extraordinary to me. And this occurred within the same week that Robert F. Kennedy is basically, or they attempted to censor his speech before a committee that was designed to discuss and explore censorship. So it's amazing how when it's speech that they like, they always invoke the First Amendment. But when it's speech that they don't like, the First Amendment is like the redheaded stepchild, the
So
orphan.
dangerous. It's
It's
so
so
dangerous.
dangerous, and it's not absolute. Yeah, the only time the First Amendment is absolute
Is
is
when
when
it's vulgar.
it's vulgar and when someone is parroting leftist lies, and then it's sacrosanct. It's really extraordinary to me, but the argument really that he's protected by the First Amendment in this case is really a non-starter. He is a teacher at LSU, acting in his capacity as a teacher, and he is threatening a public official. In those situations, I mean, the First Amendment clearly has certain restrictions that are imposed on it in that situation. But the bottom line is, it's really a laughable argument. But that's the latest development. They are arguing that Professor Venable should be reinstated because his termination violates the First Amendment. So we'll see what occurs. We know that we have a lot of our listeners who have already reached out
Yeah.
and touched the LSU administration, demanding just the opposite, demanding that he be removed from the campus. So we will keep you involved in that. And Danielle, my understanding is that yours truly, you actually made a call or sent an email to the administration on this.
I sure did. Yeah, I did call. I left a voicemail for the assistant. I believe her name is Debbie. I did not get a call back. I did welcome a call back, but it may bear cause for me to just call back one more time. Why not? The other thing I wanted to mention is that we did say that we'd have Senator Facey on sometime to give his perspective. We will do that if this develops any further. I don't think there hasn't been enough to add to the story, I think, to ask for his time. But if the story further develops, I think we will have him on. And of course, the phone numbers and everything is will be in the show notes. And maybe just another housekeeping note while I'm thinking about it is last episode 45, we did belatedly add to the show notes the legislators who voted in a way that killed the bills in the veto override session, or if their absences killed a bill. If you would like to know who they are, that all that information is in the show notes for the last episode, and their phone numbers and emails are as well if you'd like to make your displeasure known. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to say that while we're kind of catching up. And Chris, you also mentioned to me that there was recently, I think just this weekend, a resolution that was put forward commending our state superintendent of schools, Cade Brumley.
Very, very pleased to report this. LeCag issued a strong letter of endorsement along with Moms for Liberty and We the People of Northwest Louisiana, We the People HOMA, of which you are a happy prodigy. And all these groups sent a letter supporting a resolution that Jerry Bruyette proposed within the Republican State Central Committee this past weekend to commemorate Superintendent Cade Brumley for all of the great work he has done for education in Louisiana, fighting back against critical race theory, fighting aggressively back in 2020 and 2021 to reopen the state in the face of our governor's draconian lockdowns and mask mandates. He fought to try to get the kids back to school. He has worked hard to promote programs that are different than the traditional four-year college course after high school, to promote trades, knowing that not all students are destined for a four-year education. He has just really, really fought hard for Republican principles. And I was so glad to see the Republican State Central Committee, which is really the policymaking body of the Republican Party in Louisiana, issue a formal commendation for Superintendent Brumley this past weekend. What a great development. And I'll tell you, Danielle, there are few who deserve it any more than Cade Brumley.
I couldn't agree with you more. I first heard of Cade Brumley from Katie, your wife, and she couldn't say enough about him. And he recently, last week, I got to meet him. He came and was the guest speaker at We the People Bayou Communities monthly mixer, and just what a stand-up guy. I mean, very common sense, very down to earth, very approachable. He weathered, I don't know, maybe 20 or more questions from the audience with just kindness and grace. I think what he's doing for the state of reading and math and social studies, what he's doing to instill American history and pride in our country and our state again. I think the plans he has as an administrator are just so commendable and so honorable. And I'm so glad that this resolution passed and he's getting the recognition he deserves. And I think Chris we'll hopefully be inviting him sometime in the coming weeks or months. I believe his office is up for reappointment or reelection by the Bessie board. So maybe we can learn a little bit from him about that process and what we can do as a community to support him and his common sense, pro student mindset.
Very, very excited about having him on the show. And what you said a few minutes ago reminded me, Danielle, about his involvement in the development of the social studies standards in Louisiana. He worked very closely with the Bessie board and made sure that the traditional conservative views were well represented there. And now the social studies standards in the state of Louisiana are the envy of the nation.
It's amazing.
It is amazing because of Cade Brumley. So definitely wanted to mention how proud we are of his commendation he received this weekend. And also, as you said, that his contract is scheduled to be renewed very soon, maybe the first part of next year or even toward the end of this year. But again, Louisiana is very lucky to have them, and we're going to be promoting diligently the renewal of Superintendent Brumley's contract.
Yes, we will. You know, the Bible says that the people perish for lack of knowledge, and I don't think there's a time in history where that's more apparent. So, the critical import of having a champion like that at the helm is just cannot be understated,
So well said.
overstated, cannot be overstated. Sorry.
I know exactly what you meant. As my son would say, Danielle, he goes, "Dad, is it opposite day?" And I would say, "Well, yes, it's opposite day. So everything he says, you're supposed to conclude just the opposite." So I know what you meant. I
There
knew
we go.
exactly.
Perfect.
Yeah.
You're synced up with me. Okay, well, let's do a little bit of a victory lap, Chris. We have so much to celebrate, and I think, you and I are both hard chargers, and our instinct is to just move on to the next battle. But I don't think that we can really move forward without kind of closing out this chapter of the legislative session by recounting the victories that the Lord has given us, the fights that seem so impossible that actually we managed to win. And our listeners had such a huge, huge vital part in that. And so I think it's only fitting that we kind of do one last lap of this legislative session and talk through. Maybe we'll start out with the bills that we helped kill that would have imposed some negative consequences on the people of the state.
It would have been Danielle, it would have been, disastrous if some of these bills that we were instrumental in killing had actually gotten through, because I'll tell you now, every single one of them would have been signed by the governor.
Yes, they would have.
It's such a great thing when one of the tools that you have is to keep bad legislation from ever getting to his desk. And we did that on multiple items of legislation, along with the help of people across the state. One of the top ones was House Bill 490. You and I talked about this on the podcast. I know our listeners must have sent 500 emails or phone calls to our legislators. House Bill 490. You recall Representative Lyons' bill that would have allowed third party leftist activist groups to go into the high schools across Louisiana and, as Scott McKay said, dragoon or coerce high school seniors into registering with the Democratic Party, registering to vote, and essentially a ballot harvesting process in the high schools with the seniors. What could possibly go wrong there?
Yeah, and we also mentioned that this was just a big data collection scheme as well.
Yes, because it didn't require the consent of parents.
Yeah.
And so that's yet another reason, the privacy implications of this, the disclosure of personal information to third party groups who had not been properly vetted. The whole thing would have been a disaster, but it was put forward and it got out of committee. I know this will shock you, with the help of a couple of rhino Republicans, and then gets into the House floor. And that is where we were instrumental in gutting that legislation to the point where it was crippled. It was basically dead on arrival. Some version of it did end up passing, but the provision that allows third party groups to go into high schools in order to register high school seniors to vote and really to indoctrinate them into leftist ideology was completely eviscerated from the bill, to the point where you and I really called the bill neutral
Yeah.
after that occurred, and really were not pushing it one way or the other because we essentially eviscerated the parts of the bill that were the most troubling. So
Yeah.
490, what a great victory, and that would not have happened if we had not had our listeners, our faithful listeners at LCAG members calling in and emailing these representatives and senators. No way it would have happened.
100%. And there were several bills that we were able to help kill related to students and minors altogether. The next one, Chris, was going to impact students. It was Representative Mincy's House Bill 472, the Interstate Compact for Teachers.
Yes, this is the bill that would have put Louisiana in a intrastate compact with multiple other states under the direction and supervision of the federal government.
What could go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong there? Exactly. It's like, do we ever learn? Will we ever learn? Anyway, and they would have decided whether, how, when, and the criteria whereby teachers who wanted to come to Louisiana and teach were certified, and also the criteria by which we reciprocated with other states. So that would not have been a decision that the state of Louisiana independently would make with regard to what the criteria is for qualifying teachers to teach in our state. We would have subjected ourselves to an interstate compact, and God only knows what kind of criteria and standards and stipulations would have been imposed. And the bill specifically said in its original form that decisions made by this compact superseded state law in Louisiana.
So
It was
sick.
specifically written in the bill, which is why ultimately we were able to be instrumental in killing this bill. And Senator Beth Mizell looked straight at Buddy Mincy in the Senate committee and said, Representative Mincy, I don't know what your intentions are here. And ultimately, your intentions are your own. But on the face of this bill, this is a compromise and a forfeiture of Louisiana sovereignty. We can't have it, can't go through. And the bill was basically killed in committee. And as in the case of 490, Danielle, some version of it did end up passing, but it was really completely innocuous, and all of the troubling provisions therein. There's no compact left in it anymore. And so there is no compromise of Louisiana sovereignty on this bill now. Thank
Beautiful.
God for our listeners calling in.
Absolutely. And why don't we take this opportunity, Chris, to remind our listeners that Representative Mincy is running for Senate?
Yes, but Representative Mincy is running for the state Senate against Valerie Hodges. I know we've made no secret about what our hopes and intentions are in that race, that we support Valerie Hodges. We think Representative Buddy Mincy has been a minion for the teachers' unions and the school boards and really for big government. And so Buddy Mincy, who's running for state Senate, is the one who attempted to subject Louisiana to this multi state compact, surrendering our sovereignty, compromising our autonomy as a state. And he should not be voted for. He should be retired. Valerie Hodges must be the next state senator out in Livingston Parish.
Yep. Amen. And we hope that when you hear the name Buddy Mincy, you just say no. Moving moving
Just
on.
say no, and don't use the acronym JYN because it doesn't have the force. It's just JSNs. It just say no. Just say no.
Yeah, just say
Yeah.
no. Moving on, Chris, Representative Freiberg, another rhino who caused some trouble for us this session, brought forward House Bill 471. You and I spent a great deal of time on this bill. Do you want to remind us what it was?
Yes, this was one that you and I talked about almost as much as we talked about the cell phone bill, which we'll talk about in a minute. This was the bill that would have allowed pharmacists to administer vaccines across the board, any vaccine, to ages 7 and up, and without a prescription from a doctor. You and I talked about all of the different reasons why this was problematic. We've been over it a number of times, not the least of which is the fact that pharmacists do not have the full medical history of people coming in there. They're not equipped to deal with adverse effects. Just a bad idea across the board. And Representative Thomas Presley, with our help and the help of many others, was able to kill this legislation with the help of Representative Michael Echols. In the 11th hour, after it had come out of conference committee, they really charged it very strongly and really dismantled this bill in the 11th hour. And we're just very, very pleased that, at least as it stands now, a 7-year-old cannot go into a pharmacy and get a vaccine, experimental or otherwise, unless he has a prescription from a medical doctor. So that is such a wonderful thing that bill was defeated.
Yes, and Representative Freiberg also has a contender for her seat this session. I mean, this campaign season, Chris.
The one and only Jenny Seals, who announced a little over a week ago that she will be running against Representative Freiberg. And just remember that you heard it here first. Jenny Seals has the energy, the passion, the work ethic and the ideals to win that race. I think it is a great setup for her, and I believe that she will win. We're so pleased to be supporting Jenny Seals for that seat.
Yes, indeed. I'm ready to see a lot of these rhinos become toast, political toast.
And I'm not talking about avocado toast.
No, no, burnt toast.
I'm talking burnt toast.
Okay, let's see. Next, you wanted to also talk about Representative Huval's HB 580. This one was the dying cockroach, which became the crushed cockroach.
Yes, it was the dying cockroach, and I'll never forget after it made its way out of the transportation committee, uh, with the help of the vote of two Rhino Republicans, it gets into the House floor, and let me tell you what, we had an awful lot of people reaching out every single day. We don't want 580. We want to be able to talk on our cell phones in a vehicle without being fined for it, without having to go appear before a judge, without being reprimanded for it. We can do that. Most Louisiana citizens are able to drive a vehicle and hold a handheld cell phone at the same time. We do not need big brother government intervening in our lives in this situation. There was no evidence that prohibiting talking on a handheld cell phone in your vehicle actually even reduced traffic accidents. They had no proof of that. This was just a power grab by the government and probably a money grab as well. And fortunately, it died on the House floor, was never called for a vote. And so our freedom to be able to talk on a handheld cell phone lives for another year, Danielle, but I guarantee you that it will rear its ugly head in the next session. So we need to be really alert and really, really ready for it because they bring it every year.
Well, we just have to get rid of all the rhinos, and then we won't have to be looking for garbage like this.
Yes, indeed. And I'll tell you right now, if we can reduce the number of the rhinos, as you just said, a lot of this bad legislation will not even be put forward anymore.
And it's such a time waste. I mean, let's just bring forward bills that are going to be useful. The entire reason, Chris, that we have a part-time legislature is because the founding of the state didn't see it fit that this be a full-time job. So why waste time with garbage legislation when we can just be bringing forward things that protect liberties? But I mean, anyway, I won't get off on a tangent. That'll be a conversation for another day, probably a conversation for many other days, but that's my
Exactly.
perspective.
You're right. Not just one.
Not just one. Okay, and lastly, but certainly not least, another set of bills that were killed were bills that were seeking to weaken pro-life laws. There were 3 of them, one of which I believe was brought by a Republican who also needs to be defeated just
Yes.
solely because she brought this legislation. But those 3 bills, Chris, got killed in committee.
In committee, fortunately, the one that was brought by the Republican, Representative Mary Dubuisson, with House Bill 461, would have weakened the protections for the unborn in Louisiana, as well as HB 598, brought by a Democrat, and HB 522, brought by a Democrat. None of those pro abortion bills made it out of the Criminal Justice Committee. And we're very, very pleased that despite their very best efforts, we still have very strong pro life laws in Louisiana. These bills, Danielle, are designed very specifically to undermine the protections of our statutory protections of the unborn in Louisiana that came about as a result of the reversal of Roe versus Wade. And they're trying to do it with very sympathetic language about rape and incest and all the rest of it. But fortunately, the good people on the committee in the House saw through it, and one by one, these bills fell. And I wanted to mention the name of Debbie Melvin, who is one of the pro-life activists who was down there and very engaged in this legislation. Just very impressed with the way she handled herself, with the way she testified before the committee on these bills. And just wanted to give Debbie a shout out.
Yeah, she's so great.
She was an inspiration.
She's
Yeah.
also We the People Bayou community member. and a
Oh,
very and
well, that explains it.
she's the head of our legislative committee.
I mean, you know what? When she came up to me and first introduced me, and she said, "My name's Debbie Belvin with We the People Bayou," and I said, "You know what, ma'am? You had me at we."
She's so wonderful.
She's just a great, great lady, and it's just such a thrill to be in this fight with her, particularly when we're talking about fighting to protect the unborn. So I wanted to mention her by name.
Yes, and you know what's not escaping me, Chris, is the fact that these were brought before the House Criminal Justice Committee. They were not brought before Health and Welfare. And I think that speaks volumes about the state of how the mindset has shifted in the state when it
Oh
comes
yeah.
to abortion, and I just couldn't be prouder.
I could not be prouder. And again, we will keep our eyes and ears open. If these bills or anything similar to it rears its ugly head in the next session, we will be all over it.
Yes, indeed. Now we'll just kind of march through these pretty quickly. The bills that we advanced and the bills that really finally made it through, squeaked out underneath, didn't see the light of Edwards's veto pen and will be either brought to ballot or put or signed, or signed into law, enacted.
Yeah. And some of these bills, Danielle, some of these bills here were signed by the governor. Some of them were constitutional amendments. Some of them were resolutions that didn't have to get to the governor. So, when you and I were sitting down pre-show, it's like this is quite a very good list of victories here that we've got to bring out.
Absolutely. And there were what, 6, 7, 8 more additional bills that were brought that made it all the way through up until the veto pen. And so I know we spent a lot of time on those last show, so we won't really get into those today. We know which ones they were. We know the rhinos responsible for killing them.
Yeah. And so just to be clear, Danielle, before we start, as you just said, the bills that we're going to talk about right now that are finally passed do not include the ones that were passed in both chambers and ultimately vetoed by our esteemed governor. These are the ones that were successful all the way through.
Absolutely. So let's start with the one that had, I guess you could just call it the most hard fought victory. And that was the one that everyone in the state should know about by now. And it's Representative Furman's House Bill 648.
Thank God for Representative Furman and the courage that he showed getting this through the House. Thank God for Senator Jay Morris, who carried it on the Senate floor. Representative Senator Jeremy Stein, who was also a strong proponent on the Senate floor, vocal. Senator Mike Facey,
Yeah.
who worked hard on this as well to get it through, only to be vetoed by the governor. Veto override session, we go in and both chambers ultimately override the governor's veto. So as it sits now, minors in Louisiana will not be subject to any kind of chemical castration or genital mutilation, transgender type procedures or surgery in Louisiana, marking the last state in the South, as you've mentioned before, Danielle, to prohibit this ghastly procedure on minors in Louisiana. Very satisfying, very gratifying, and the result of an awful lot of hard work by a lot of people.
Yes, and a huge relief. I mean, I just to have that on our conscience as a state that we would be participating in this kind of disgusting practice is just beyond me. I mean, look, Chris, I worked for almost 2 decades in Africa. And the thought that all of these liberals who were so against genital mutilation and these kinds of ritualistic quote unquote surgeries for minor girls across the continent of Africa, they were some of the loudest proponents against it, which rightly so. But then you're going to come to your own country and champion this as a right. I mean, it's disgusting. It's just disgusting. So
Yes,
I'm very, very grateful that that's something that we don't have to have on our conscience any longer.
me as well.
Yep. And there were a couple other bills that touch the education of children. One is Senator Cloud's SB 7. It's been a little while since we talked about this one, but I think it's just such a fantastic one, Chris.
It is a great bill, and this is a bill that simply ensures that parents have a right to know what their children are accessing in public libraries in Louisiana, and that their children cannot access anything that is inappropriate for their age in any public library in Louisiana unless their parents know about it and authorize it. You'd think that that's a no-brainer. Unfortunately, it did meet with some resistance in the legislature, but Senator Cloud got it through both houses. And don't ever say that a blind hog does not find an acorn every now and then, because Governor Edwards signed this into law. I'm not sure whether he was half asleep. I'm not sure if he was drunk. I don't know. But he signed this into law. And so as of now, our minors in Louisiana have some real protection with regard to exposure to illicit materials in public libraries. What a celebration, and what a tribute to our listeners and to citizens across Louisiana who made the calls, who sent the emails, and who demanded that this legislation be passed.
Absolutely. And Chris, at the beginning of session, we said, wouldn't it be so amazing? Wouldn't it be a testament to the right direction the state was heading, and just the fact that the eyes of the people have turned back to the Lord, if that bill passed and we got pornographic materials out of the hands of children and instead put the Bible in the hands of children? And that's exactly what happened with Representative Hodges' HB 68.
Absolutely. And I do remember you saying that. I remember you saying just that. And that's exactly what happened, because House Bill 68, Representative Hodges' great piece of legislation that authorizes offering the history and literature of the Bible to high school students in Louisiana across the state as an elective course. You and I both know, Danielle, there's not a book in the history of the world that has more profoundly influenced people across the ages in every area and walk of life. And the idea that high school students will have the opportunity to understand the history, the literature, and the contribution that the Bible has made to the development of mankind throughout the centuries is really extraordinary. And it passed both houses, and our governor, once again, to his credit, signed that legislation. But all of the bills that we're talking about would not have gotten through without the hard work of State of Freedom listeners, LeCAG members, and citizens across the state.
Certainly, both in prayer and in action, in physical action through calls and emails. And Chris, there was one more bill that put God back into schools, and that was Representative Horton's House Bill 8.
In God we trust, one of the foundational principles of this country. If our founding fathers had not trusted in divine providence and that supreme ruler of mankind, as Thomas Jefferson called him, we wouldn't have a country. You and I would not have the freedom even to be doing this podcast. So, this legislation, which requires the placing of the words "In God We Trust" in or around every classroom in public schools in Louisiana, is a wonderful, wonderful sign for all the reasons that should be obvious to everyone, really. And the governor signed that legislation, again, to his credit, and we're very thankful for it.
Yes, and if our listeners could see me right now, they would see that I'm smiling ear to ear. And I'm just thinking that this is exactly what the scripture calls us to do, right? Recount the victories, recount the faithfulness of the Lord. This is our testimony from this session, absolutely. And really, it's a spiritual discipline for us to go back and recount and be thankful for the victories that God has given us. And it's just so wonderful to see that chief among them is putting him back into the eyes and the hands and the ears of our most vulnerable and most impressionable students.
I find this legislation deeply, deeply satisfying to me on a personal level. And I'm just so thankful to Representative Dodie Horton for it. Speaking of whom, is in a reelection battle up in North Louisiana against a rhino who currently is fancying himself, projecting himself as a friend of the people, Chris Turner, and he is by no means a friend of the people. And you know what, Danielle?
Mm-mm.
Representative Dodie Horton is getting her message out very, very clearly. And I believe that she will be reelected. And I think she deserves to be reelected in part because of legislation like this.
Absolutely. She really put her money where her mouth was this session, and I think her constituents know exactly where she stands on the issues that matter.
Absolutely.
So, switching gears now to state sovereignty. Senator Kathy's SCR 21 made it through.
This is one, Danielle, that LeCag and I personally had the privilege of working on, helping to draft SCR 21, the Senate concurrent resolution that affirms and establishes Louisiana's sovereign right to nullify any act of federal tyranny. I just am so delighted. It gives me euphoria, in fact, every time I think about this resolution, every time I go back and read it. It's a source of personal pride for me. I'm so happy and thankful to Senator Kathy for initiating the legislation. I'm so happy for Alan Seabaugh, who carried it on the House side. And the next time some draconian federal decree or international decree comes down, we will have a pillar, a foundation upon which to stand and say, no, sir, no, ma'am, we have the right to nullify this. This violates the Constitution. It violates our sovereignty, and it will have no force and effect in the state of Louisiana. I'm so proud of this resolution for that reason, and I know that there's no way that would have gotten through without the grace of God and tremendous support from our listeners. In fact, Danielle, a representative from West Virginia, called me several days ago and said, wow. We're so gratified that y'all were able to get that passed in Louisiana. We want to do something similar in West Virginia. We're going to have a battle and a fight to get it through, but can you help us? And we said absolutely,
Amazing.
anything that we can do to help you get this through. And we are hoping, Danielle, that every state in the country in due course has a similar resolution affirming state sovereignty.
I love it. I love it. And I would love to work with any state that wants to pass something similar to this. It's just so important. And I think it's a great reminder to the people of the states exactly where we stand and exactly who holds the reins of power.
Well said.
Moving on to another state sovereignty bill, Representative Hodges' House Bill 537 got signed by the governor against all odds, Chris.
Yes, it sure did. And you recall just a little brief history about House Bill 537. You know, it passed out of the House Governmental Affairs Civil Law Committee and then the full House floor. And then it goes before the Senate Judiciary Committee. And we thought, well, this is a bill that will ban our foreign adversaries from buying up immovable property in the interior of our state. Surely it's going to pass a Republican dominated Senate Judiciary Committee. There will be no question it's going to get through here. Well, we get in there, and with the help of Democrat Senator Jay Luno and the fecklessness of Republican Chairman Barrow Peacock, that legislation was killed in the Senate Judiciary Committee. And everyone was shocked, but we weren't shocked for long because we put out a call to action and demanded that bill be reheard in the Senate Judiciary Committee. And sure enough, it was, with a very, very different result. And it was passed out and onto the Senate floor and passed in the full Senate and ultimately signed by the governor. So there is protection in Louisiana now, thank God, against our foreign adversaries purchasing immovable property in the state or acquiring immovable property in the state of Louisiana. For that, we are deeply thankful. And you know what I think on this, Danielle?
What's that?
I know that a lot of pressure in particular was put on the governor to sign this legislation because of speculation that he perhaps was himself compromised to the Chinese Communist Party for awarding a chemical contract back in 17 or 18, and a big one in the state of Louisiana. And I think perhaps he signed it in order to avoid any scrutiny on that issue. But whatever the reason was, he signed it, and it's a great piece of legislation, and our listeners deserve much, much credit.
Yes, they do. And not least of which because this bill was one of several bills that was party to some shenanigans in committee and was killed at least once and found itself resurrected. And I just think there's no reason for that other than the faithfulness of the Lord, him hearing our prayers and our listeners calling relentlessly and just hammering the House to make sure, and the Senate to make sure, that this bill passed. And it's just remarkable. And you know, I think you've lived through a couple of these legislative sessions, Chris, firsthand, and I don't think that there are other recent examples outside of this session where so much shenanigans got overcome.
Danielle, it's such a great point you make. In fact, I asked Representative Woody Jenkins, who served in the state legislature for 30 years, wrote significant parts of the Louisiana Constitution, absolutely brilliant. And I asked him, after 537 was revived and passed out of the Senate Judiciary Committee, I said, Woody, have you, in your experience, ever seen anything like this where a bill is killed in committee and then is ordered returned to committee and then passes out favorably? And he said he recalls one, maybe two times in a 30-year period where that occurred. So it's extremely rare, and there's no question that it was the relentless demands and contacts and communications by citizens across Louisiana, many of whom listened to this program, demanding that that bill be passed.
Absolutely. And Chris, if you will remember the numbers of these pieces of legislation better than I will, but 537 was party to that, overcoming shenanigans. House Bill 648 absolutely was part of that. And then there was one other by Representative Edmonston, which did ultimately fail, but first overcame a ploy in committee to kill it.
Absolutely. House Bill 372, Representative Kathy Edmonston's state sovereignty bill with regard to these tyrannical federal and
That's right.
international health decrees. Well, we went in there, and because a couple of the Republican legislators managed to coincidentally exit the committee room right at the time when the vote was going down. The vote fell by about two votes, but due to a lot of pressure from citizens, it was reheard in the committee. Ultimately, it failed. However, it was heard twice, and we are keeping a very, very close eye. And you will recall, Danielle, that Representative Edmonds said that she absolutely plans to bring that legislation back next year. And do you know that one of the reasons why that bill failed in the House Health and Welfare Committee is because of a deplorable rhino by the name of Atrocious Joe Stagney, who happens to sit on the House Health and Welfare Committee, spoke very vocally against that bill because he's a federal shill, and it died in committee. But he now has an opponent by the name of Amanda Eberts, and hopefully he will be involuntarily resigned from the Louisiana legislature come October 14th of this year.
I'm looking forward to seeing that. I really am. Okay, two more bills to mention on our victory lap before we shift gears. So they are both constitutional amendments, Chris. One, oh, you know what? I misspoke. There's three more bills. One is Representative Amity's HCR 71. This was one of two CBDC bills she brought forward.
Yeah, and it's a House concurrent resolution, Representative Amity. It's very important because it strongly encourages the U.S. Congress to reject efforts by the Biden administration to adopt or pass laws adopting central bank digital currency as a currency for the United States. CBDC, Danielle, as we've discussed many times, is a very nefarious form of electronic currency. by which federal and international elites ultimately will be able to surveil and control our investments and regulate our economic activity. There's nothing more flagrantly unconstitutional or more flagrantly anti American than CBDC. And right now in the Congress is a strong resolution from Representative Amity that passed both houses. And this resolution is before the Congress now, strongly encouraging them to reject CBDC for our country. So, a strong statement by our state to the Congress on this important issue. Again, how many callers of ours made calls or sent emails to our representatives demanding passage of HCR 71? It was not only a few.
No, it wasn't. It was plenty, and I'm very thankful that we sent that on to the Congress. Two
I
of
will say this,
Yeah,
Danielle, and it's worth parenthetically mentioning this. Do you realize who were the only two Republicans in either house to actually vote against HCR 71? Would you venture a guess?
you'll have to tell me.
Barrow Peacock, the
That
state
guy.
senator who never seems to find any facet of international or federal encroachment that he doesn't seem somewhat attracted to, but he seems particularly attracted to things like intrastate compacts because he sponsored Buddy Mincy's 472, and he seems very attracted to this CBDC. He was the only senator who voted against it, except for the only Senator Rogers Pope, who, as you recall, formally opted out of a veto override session, showed up for it, but if he had had his way, we wouldn't have had a veto override session. Those two senators, Peacock and Pope, were the only two to actually vote against that important resolution by Representative Amity about CBDC.
And we're not looking at having to see Senator Peacock back at the legislature, are we?
No, because his district was carved out with the redistricting. So I guess maybe that, on the whole, is a good thing. As you said earlier, Danielle, Cleo Fields, who is a staunch die in the wool Democrat, a fundamentally decent person, and actually on a personal level, a friend of mine, and a very decent person. He voted for HCR
Exactly.
71, but Barrow Peacock and Rogers Pope couldn't manage to find the yay button on that one.
All right, we'll just leave it there so we don't get lost on a tangent, but I'm very glad that he's not gonna be up for reelection, that's all.
Me too.
Very good. Okay, moving on to the 2 constitutional amendments.
Before we go on there, Danielle, not
Yeah.
to interrupt you, but I did want to mention briefly because it's very important Senate Bill 63, Senator Mizell's constitutional amendment, religious freedom.
Mhm.
Did we talk about that?
No, but it was on my list, but it's okay.
Oh, no, no, no. I'm sorry. I thought we were moving on to another topic. I should have known. I should always know that your eagle eye is always sharp. I should never doubt you.
It's all good, it's all good. So why don't we start back with okay, so there's 2 constitutional amendments that made it through. The first is Representative Maguez's House Bill 311.
Yes, and this is the one that we worked very closely with Representative Miguez on. You recall, Danielle, that this was the third time that Representative Miguez brought this legislation. He brought it as a bill, as he brought it just as a law 2 years ago, and it was not allowed to be called for a vote. Well, actually, it was called for the vote on the Senate floor, but the Senate president engaged in such machinations, he made sure that it fell 2 votes short, so he killed it. Then last year, it was vetoed by the governor. So this year, 2023, the third time it was brought, he brought it as a constitutional amendment. And what it will do, if it passes the ballot in October, which I believe it will ban foreign and dark and illicit money from being donated to any election official in the state of Louisiana who's charged with the responsibility of conducting an election. It will really help to clean up the money trail in our election process, keep our election officials' hands clean, and really help to reform the integrity of our election process. So I don't have any reason to believe that this should not pass overwhelmingly on a constitutional ballot in October. I'm assuming you agree with me on that.
I do. I feel really about this bill that it's one of those one small leap for us and one giant leap for the state kind of thing. It's just we've
Ooh.
had so much focus on election integrity, and this is really the only thing, Chris, remind me if I'm wrong, but this is the only thing that we've seen get all the way through. Now, of course, it still has to pass through the will of the people in this upcoming October's vote, but it just seems that this is a step in the right direction.
It is a step in the right direction, and it was brilliant in my view for Representative Miguez to posture this as a constitutional amendment. Now, obviously, there's a great risk in that
Yeah.
because a constitutional amendment, as you know, in any point in the session has to pass two-thirds both houses to get to the people, not just in an override session. And so there was a real risk in structuring it as a constitutional amendment. But I know that his thought was, look, so let's say we get it through again and it gets to the governor's desk and he vetoes it again. So where are we? So
Yeah.
why not take the risk? But by God's grace and a lot of hard work, he got it through two-thirds in both houses, and now it's going to the people.
Yes, it is. And, you know, when you said it was risky, I thought you were going in a totally different direction. It's very risky to bring an election integrity bill to an election. It's very difficult to put it on the machines for a digital ballot. So we'll see how that shakes out. But I think, you know, I mean, neither you nor I are big fans of these Dominion machines or any of the other machines that the state wants to offer us. We'd like to see something very, very different, something much more straightforward, and something with a chain of custody. However, prayers are needed. I think watchful eyes will be needed on this election more than ever.
Absolutely. And what's the alternative, Danielle? Yes, we're skeptical about these voting machines, but the alternative, you can't just curl up in the fetal position and not push candidates
Exactly.
anymore, not push bills anymore. We have to continue the fight. But that reminds me, at one point we should have Brandon Trosclair on the show
Yes.
so that he can talk to us. A really impressive young man. He's owns multiple grocery stores throughout South Louisiana, and I think some in Central Louisiana as well, and maybe even in Mississippi, 13 or 14 grocery stores. But he's running for Secretary of State, has really mastered the issues that plague our electronic voting system, and has a great solution for it. Current Secretary of State candidate. Let's make sure we have him on at some point.
Yeah, I'd love to have him on. I think we need to dedicate at least one whole week just to the topic of election integrity because you and I are so passionate about it. And we know a number, quite a number of very passionate people who are also very, very well informed on these topics, various points on this topic. And so I think it'll do a lot for our listeners to get some different perspectives on this issue.
I do too, Danielle. And the reason why it's so important is that if our vote is not secure, if we are not 100% secure in knowing we can rely on our vote, that it reflects our intent and our will every single time, every single vote, if we don't have confidence in that process, really, in a very real sense, we don't have a republic. It doesn't really matter what else we do, how hard we fight. If they can rig elections, if they can alter and manipulate voting machines in order to produce the results that they want, then what are we really fighting for? That's why it is so important. And I think the secure hand marked paper ballots with the risk limiting post election audits is really the only way to get that done. But perhaps a conversation for another day. But yeah, I agree with you 100%. Critically, critically important.
Yep, indeed. Now, the last bill that we're going to touch on is Senate Bill 63 by Senator Mizell. This is the other constitutional amendment, and it's just such a beautiful one.
I love it. I know it's one of your favorites and really was brought in the aftermath of all of these lockdowns where, our governor infinite wisdom made a determination that it was perfectly appropriate to keep the bars and the abortion clinics open, but it was in the interest of public safety to close down all the churches. I'm not sure that the most acute sophist in the history of the world can make sense of that logic. I don't see it. I can't. But a lot of people suffered during those lockdowns because they couldn't go worship. Well, this bill reestablishes in the Constitution that not only the right of religious worship, but the location of religious worship is a fundamental right, and the government may not intrude in that right absent a compelling justification. This is so important to establish this in law. It will be on the ballot in October, right next to House Bill 311, and I am certainly hoping that Louisiana citizens across the state approve this all important religious freedom amendment.
Yeah. I think it's going to be a very exciting election season, not only for the races, but because of these two bills being on the ballot.
Oh, no question about it. I feel very optimistic about them. And I know that you and I will not be hesitant or shy about reminding our listeners to go and vote.
No, no, I think we're starting today. Just go ahead, mark your calendars, plan to vote, plan to vote early.
We're not going to tell you to go and start camping outside of your precinct today. It's a little early for that, but maybe in a week.
All right, Chris. Well, we have done our victory lap quite effectively, I think. Maybe not the most efficiently, but quite effectively. And we hope that you, the listeners, are just feeling very encouraged, feeling like your voice, your calls, your emails made a difference, because I have to tell you, they made the world of difference. And the reason we're sitting here in a posture of victory and celebration is because of the tireless work of you. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So let's shift gears now. And Chris, I thought now we could maybe just talk a little bit to the listeners, tell them what we're working on behind the scenes. We've been so much about the business of the legislature that I don't think that people have really gotten to peek behind the curtain and know what all we're working on. So maybe I can just share a couple highlights of that, and there'll be more updates about this stuff in the days and weeks to come. But the first thing is just to say that we really want to open the lines of communication with you, the listeners, because we want to be able to tap into your wisdom and your insight and your intel as well. So, we are working hard on a website right now for the State of Freedom. It will be live in the next couple of days to a week, something like that. Don't hold me to it so tightly, but that's what we're looking at right now. And the website's going to be one avenue to get in touch with us. And then another way to do that is we are also in the process of setting up social media accounts. So those will both be ways that we can be in touch with you directly. We will also provide some ways for you to support us through subscriptions and advertising. Chris and I both feel very, very strongly that we will never ever put a paywall up for this show. We believe absolutely that the truth must get out there to as many people as possible. We need to activate as many people as possible to action. And so we are not going to put up a paywall, but we may provide some bonus episodes for subscribers and some other perks. But like I said, the bread and butter of what we do, we want to keep open source to maximize the reach of the truth and the number of activated warriors who fight alongside of us.
Absolutely. The more people we are able to reach, the better. And the more powerful we become, the more powerful the voice of the people becomes. And I just cannot wait. I'm just thrilled with the progress that we've already made. But setting up our social media and our website is going to make it so much easier for our listeners to support us and to really feel like they're part of our family.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really excited about that, and we're working hard on that behind the scenes. Also, Chris, we're beefing up the LeCag website with some new resources, and we will be providing some more ways for people to get engaged there. And in my view, and I think yours as well, this is the primary tool we have for supporting Louisiana First candidates. We're still figuring out kind of what that's going to look like, but in the days and weeks ahead, we will know more. But even right now, the website is maybe been a little neglected because you guys know that we have been so busy focused on this legislative session. So we will be updating it, but it is a place, Chris, that listeners can go and support us, support the candidates that choose Louisiana first every time.
Absolutely. And as you said, Danielle, LACAG, www.lacag.org, is the primary tool whereby we promote, support, endorse, and help Louisiana First candidates to win. If you trust us, listeners, and I know that you do at this point, to bring you the truth, if you trust us to support the right candidates that will help to preserve our freedom and our liberty, go to our website and subscribe to LeCag. The subscription is $22 a month. And if you don't want to subscribe, you can just simply do a one time donation or a recurring donation, however you want to do it, because the resources that you help bless us with help us to get the word out and to really support great candidates. Candidates like Amanda Eberts, who, with our help, will beat Joe Stagney. And we know why it's so important, Danielle. Joe
Yeah.
Stagney was one of the only Republicans in the legislature to vote against the transgender mutilation bill on minors, a Republican. He has to go, and with our help, Amanda Eberts will beat him. But candidates like her and others across the state, you can help us with your contributions to change the complexion of the Louisiana legislature.
Yes, and we will be coming to you with more details about both the State of Freedom and LeCag in the coming weeks, but we wanted to make sure that you knew these are all things that we're working on. We're working to get better connected to you, and we really, really appreciate your support, your encouragement, your listening, your sharing. We just can't say enough about how grateful we are, that we're in this together and that you are fighting alongside us. So, Chris, I think the next question that everyone is wanting to know is what this election season is going to look like.
Well, I'll tell you what, Danielle, we've got races across the board from Baton Rouge to Natchitoches to Jefferson Parish. It's all over. And I'm just excited about the opportunities that we have to knock off these rhinos and elect good constitutional conservatives. I'm thrilled. There's also the attorney general race, the governor's race, the commissioner of insurance race, all of these races, many of whom we're going to be directly involved in, especially the ones that are the most contentious, and make sure that these rhinos, the ones who betrayed the citizens of Louisiana, are knocked off and defeated once and for all. And I know that our listeners are sick and tired of being betrayed by their leaders, betrayed by those who they placed their trust in. That's why we exist, Danielle.
Yep.
I know you know that, but we exist to return our legislature to the citizens and to rebuild their faith in our system and in the process.
Yeah, I couldn't say it better, Chris. I think, there's three categories of races I've been bucketing these into in my mind. One is, like you said, those hotly contested seats that would overthrow rhinos or vulnerable Democrats. The second is the rhino seats that need solid conservative opposition or have been vacated and need a good candidate to stand up and run. And then the third bucket is really, and something I think we'll look at to a lesser extent, but we will still cover races that are not contested, but do stand to change the composition of the legislature in a very meaningful way. So those are kind of the three types of races we're going to be covering over the next couple of months. And, Chris, as I was looking yesterday, looking back at some of the founding documents from the Louisiana Purchase, and I wanted to just take a look at when the founders of the state, when the leadership of the United States was looking to make the Louisiana Purchase, what did they see in Louisiana? And I found in a letter from James Madison to Robert Livingston this quote. I'll just share it with the listeners because it was very moving to me. And I think that this is really kind of a bulwark for us as we are looking at what is the goal of the state of freedom? What is the goal of LeCag and our listeners and the people who are working so hard to move this state back into a right place? To what is the original intent for the state of Louisiana? And that's what I thought I saw in this quote. And James Madison says, under prudent management, Louisiana may be made to do much good as well as to prevent much evil. By lessening the military establishment otherwise requisite or countenanced, it will answer the double purpose of saving expense and favoring liberty. And just maybe a little background for the listeners, which I had to do a little extra research to understand. Spain and France were occupying forces. They were the owners of what we know as the Louisiana Purchase. And so the United States at that time, as it stood, had to have troops deployed to its border to protect against Spain and France. And so if they purchased the Louisiana Purchase, they would not be spending all this money on the military, and they thought that this would be a greater way to expand freedom westward. And I just love that so much. And I think, Chris, when I was looking at that yesterday, what it really made me think is this is Louisiana's raison d'etre. This is what we were made to do. We have been called a state that could do as much good as well as to prevent much evil. And I think we saw that in some great ways this legislative session. I think I'd like to see us take this on as a charge so that we can get the right kind of people positioned in the legislature for the year ahead, for the next 4 years, and really ahead of the 2024 presidential election. I just think we have such an opportunity, and this is our responsibility.
Wow. Wow. There's so much there. And in doing so, Danielle, and in doing much good and avoiding much evil, won't it be great to say that we were faithful to the father of the United States Constitution, James Madison, and also faithful to Robert Livingston, after whom the great Livingston Parish is named?
It would be so beautiful. And I think it's just the time in history to do something big. It's the time to stop just holding the torrent from overcoming us. It's time to just push it all the way back and start a new chapter. And I think that we're positioned to do that.
I love it. I love it. It's time to be bold, to think bold, to act bold,
Expect bold.
and expect bold. And, I cannot tell you how often I go back, Danielle, to what you told me for the first time, weeks and weeks and weeks ago, which is we are not operating for victory. We are operating from victory.
Amen.
And faith will be rewarded. But, I have no doubt, Danielle, that, and we can close out here, I suppose. I have no doubt that 60, 70 years from now, when you are close to shuffling off this mortal coil and going to see the great Father God and Jesus Christ, our Savior, you will know that you did not simply exist, but that you lived, and that you lived boldly and courageously, and that you had many, many victories along the way because of your faith. And I'm so proud to be marching forward with you day after day to preserve the state of freedom in Louisiana.
Amen. Thank you, Chris.
God bless you.
God bless you. Thanks for listening to The State of Freedom. To stay on top of all the calls to action we mentioned today, just check out the show notes for the episode. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org, LACAG.org, or email Chris at chris@lacag.org. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and share it. Give us a good rating in the reviews. If you own a business in Louisiana and are interested in supporting our show through advertising, please email us at ads.freedomstate@gmail.com. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next time.